I will never forget that night in Chicago. I was at the Rusty Nail Bar with some friends, celebrating the weekend. We drank more than we should have, and before I knew it, I was quite intoxicated. The bar was full of laughter and loud conversations, but everything seemed a bit blurry to me. When I finally decided to go home, I staggered through the dark streets of Chicago. The city, which seemed so lively during the day, was now eerily silent. The shadows of the trees and buildings seemed to move, almost as if they were following me. I tried not to think about it, but the alcohol made it difficult to shake the feeling that something was wrong. I reached my house, an old brick building in the Lincoln Park neighborhood. It was a quiet place where everyone knew each other, and I always felt safe there. Still somewhat dizzy, I remembered the key I always hid under the flower pot next to the front door. With some difficulty, I managed to get the key and enter. The house was dark and silent, just as I expected. I went straight to the kitchen, opened the fridge, and grabbed a bottle of water, trying to clear my mind. As I drank, a chill ran down my spine. The feeling of being watched returned in full force. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the paranoia, and went to my room on the second floor. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step creaking ominously in the silence of the house. When I finally reached my room, I threw myself on the bed, still dressed, and closed my eyes, hoping sleep would come quickly and take me away from that strange feeling. But I had no idea what was still to come that night. Still lying down, the silence of the house seemed to deepen, as if it were swallowing me. Then a strange sound cut through the silence, the sound of the front door opening slowly. My heart jumped. It must be Mike, I thought, referring to my brother who also lived with me. He had gone out with some friends, and it was not uncommon for him to come back late. "Mike, is that you?" I called out, my voice echoing off the empty walls. No answer, just the sound of light, almost careful steps coming in. "Mike, stop playing, man. I'm not in the mood," I shouted a bit louder, trying to inject a firmness I didn't feel. Still, nothing. Silence, then more steps. Now, they seemed to move away from the entrance and disappear into the darkness of the living room. I should have gotten up and checked, but fear kept me paralyzed in bed for a moment. The alcohol in my head and the growing fear in my chest formed a paralyzing mix. Then my cell phone vibrated on the nightstand, startling me more than I'd like to admit. It was a message from Sarah, a friend who had been with me at the bar earlier. "Did you get home okay? That strange guy was following me until I got in the car," she wrote. My stomach turned. What strange guy? My eyes raced through the message again. The penny dropped. I jumped up, heart pounding like a drum. "Who's there?" I shouted, trying to sound threatening. But my voice came out weak, trembling. The steps resumed, now louder, slowly climbing the stairs. Someone was in my house, and it wasn't Mike. Was it the stranger from the bar? My mind was spinning, and fear completely took over me. I was sober now, adrenaline cutting through any trace of alcohol. Every sound, every shadow seemed a harbinger of something terrible. I needed to do something, needed to see who it was before it was too late. My breathing was heavy, and each beat of my heart seemed to echo through the house as the steps continued up the stairs. With darkness embracing every corner, my only option was to try to see something, anything, in the corridor lit only by the weak light coming from my room. "Who's there?" I shouted again, trying to buy time as my hand searched for the lamp beside the bed. The switch seemed harder to find than ever, and the seconds before turning on the light stretched out like an eternity. Finally, the light flooded the room, and the steps abruptly ceased. The silence that followed was almost more terrifying than the steps. Almost. My heart leaped in my chest, and every sound of the wind outside seemed the prelude to a nightmare. I stood up slowly, cell phone still in hand, and walked to the bedroom door. My entire body was trembling. I knew I had to look, had to face whatever it was. With a swift movement, I opened the bedroom door and peered into the corridor. The house seemed different under the veil of fear. The shadows cast by the furniture created shapes that my tired brain insisted on turning into menacing figures. I walked down the corridor, each step increasing the tension in the air. Reaching the staircase, I looked down, trying to discern any movement in the darkness below. Nothing. Just the sound of my own breathing and the beating of my heart. "This isn't happening," I whispered to myself, trying to believe it was just the result of a night of drinking. But then, I heard a noise coming from the living room. The sound of something or someone moving. It was real. Someone really was in my house. Fear mixed with a dose of anger, and I grabbed the first object I found, an old baseball bat that was leaning against the corridor. With firm hands, I descended the stairs, preparing for whatever I might find. I reached the foot of the stairs, the baseball bat tight in my hands, every nerve in my body on edge. The darkness of the living room stretched out before me like an ocean of shadows, and I could barely discern the outlines of the furniture. My eyes struggled to adjust as I tried to control my heavy breathing, which seemed too loud in the silence surrounding me. Suddenly, another sound, a subtle dragging, coming from the direction of the kitchen. I stopped, heart racing, trying to pinpoint exactly where the noise was coming from. "Who's there?" My voice came out firmer this time, charged with nervous defiance. No answer, just the muffled sound of the wind outside, making the trees scrape their claws against the windows. I took a deep breath and advanced towards the kitchen, the bat ready for any movement. As I approached, a figure began to take shape against the dim glow of street light filtering through the thin curtains. My heart nearly stopped. There he was, a man with his back to me, rummaging through the drawers frantically. I didn't think, I just reacted. "Hey!" I shouted, and the man turned abruptly, clearly surprised. His eyes met mine, and for a moment, everything stopped. He was older than I expected, with unkempt hair and a look that carried a mix of desperation and guilt. He was not someone I recognized, definitely not Mike, nor anyone I imagined I might find in my own house. The tension between us grew, the air charged with unspoken questions. The man took a step forward, and I raised the bat, ready to defend my territory. But then, his phone rang, cutting through the tension like a knife. He hesitated, looked at me with a mix of fear and confusion, and then, without a word, he ran towards the back door, disappearing into the night. I stood there, still, trying to understand what had just happened. Adrenaline still coursing through my veins, and my hand trembling on the baseball bat. Something about that encounter left me more alarmed than relieved. Who was that man? What did he want in my house? And more importantly, would he come back? After the intruder's abrupt escape through the back door, my heart still beat erratically. Every dark corner of the house seemed to whisper sinister possibilities. I returned to the living room, my mind spinning with unanswered questions. The fear that he might come back made me check all the windows and doors, locking them firmly. The feeling of vulnerability in my own house was overwhelming. I decided to call the police. As the phone rang, my mind replayed the events. "Chicago Police, how can I help?" The voice on the other end was calm, an anchor in the storm I was experiencing. I explained the situation, trying to stay calm, but my voice trembled. "He ran away, but he was here, in my house." The minutes until the police arrived seemed to stretch on endlessly. Every sound, every creak in the house made me jump. When I finally heard the sirens, I felt a momentary relief, but the true weight of the situation only deepened. Receiving the police at my door was a concrete reminder that the security I had taken for granted had been violated. 2 officers entered, their flashlights cutting through the darkness as they conducted a sweep of the house. They were meticulous, checking each room, each closet. One of them returned to the kitchen, the place where I had encountered the intruder. "Is anything missing?" he asked, looking at the still open drawers. I scanned the kitchen, trying to remember how everything had been before. No, not that I can see. My response was hesitant, uncertainty adding another knot in my stomach. They took notes, their expressions serious and professional. After they finished inside the house, one of the officers accompanied me outside to see where the intruder had fled. The weak light from the street lamp barely illuminated the yard, casting long shadows among the trees and bushes. "Do you usually leave any spare keys outside the house?" the officer asked, his voice neutral. I stopped, suddenly realizing the mistake I had made. The key under the flower pot. Something so innocent, but now I realized how reckless it had been. Yes, I had a key under that pot. I pointed with a mix of resignation and self-criticism. The officer nodded, making a note in his pad. "We'll need to take that into consideration. It's possible he was watching you before. We'll have to investigate further." As the officers finished up and prepared to leave, one of them turned to me. "We'll do our best to catch him, but for now, it would be good if you could stay with someone or have someone here with you." The suggestion was sensible, but the idea of staying or not in my own house became a painful question. I nodded, thanking the officers before closing the door behind them. The house, now silent and secure, still echoed with the echoes of my own unrest. I knew I would not be able to sleep. The night still had many hours ahead, and each one promised to be as long as a lifetime. That night, as the police sirens moved away, I was back to the disturbing silence of my own house. The following minutes were spent in a state of nervous vigilance. I moved from room to room, each shadow and each small noise making me shudder. The feeling of vulnerability was oppressive. My house, which had always been my refuge, now seemed like hostile territory. The idea that the intruder had used my hidden key to enter haunted me. How did he know where the key was? How many times had he observed the house before deciding to enter? These questions spun in my head as I re-examined every possible entry, every window and door, ensuring they were locked. After checking the security, I sat down on the living room sofa, trying to process the events. The silence was deafening. Every car that passed on the street made me look out the window, hoping to see someone standing there, watching. Paranoia began to take over, and I knew I would not be able to sleep. That's when I decided to do something about it. I got up and began to collect all the extra keys that were hidden outside the house. The flower pot, the fake rock in the garden, the window ledge, every known hiding place was emptied. I was determined not to let something like this happen again. As I collected the keys, my mind was still on alert, my eyes constantly scanning the shadows. Every noise made me stop, my heart beating faster, but I continued, driven by a mix of fear and determination. After collecting the keys, I walked through the house one last time, checking all the locks, ensuring that every entry point was secure. The fear that the intruder might have left some way to return kept me meticulous. Finally, exhausted and still alert, I returned to the living room, sat down again, and picked up my cell phone. It was time to send messages to close friends, briefly explaining the incident and asking them to keep an eye out for any suspicious activity near my house. The response was immediate. They were concerned and offered help. A few messages of solidarity and concern were enough to make me feel a little more supported, even though the fear was still present. With the house now completely silent and the shadows of the night deepening, I knew that the real fight was not against the intruder who had fled, but against the fear he had left behind. The feeling of security had been shaken, but I was determined to recover it, no matter the cost. In the early hours that followed, as the external darkness mingled with the unrest within me, my vigilance found no respite. The incident had left me in a state of hyper-alertness, where every sound made me jump and every shadow seemed to hide threats. Amid this torment, I decided that I needed a more permanent strategy to ensure my safety. Dawn came, and with the light of day came renewed determination. I could not let fear rule my life. I called a security company, explaining my situation and my urgent need to install a comprehensive security system. They were understanding and promised to send someone that very morning. When the technician arrived, I guided him through the house, showing all the entry points. Watching him install cameras, motion sensors, and alarms, I felt a gradual relief beginning to settle in. The technician, a man named Greg, worked with reassuring efficiency, and his practical attitude helped dissipate some of the fear that the previous night had sown in me. Greg finished the job by explaining how the system worked. We tested it together, and the sound of the alarm going off, knowing it was fully operational, brought an extra layer of security that I sorely needed. Before leaving, Greg handed me his card. "Any problems, don't hesitate to call," he said, with a nod. I thanked him and closed the door behind him, feeling a bit more empowered. The house was now equipped with the latest security technology, and that gave me a sense of control that I had completely lost the night before. However, the real test came later that night. I was sitting on the sofa, trying to lose myself in a book, when the alarm went off. My heart leaped in my throat as I ran to the panel. But it was just a false alarm. An animal had triggered one of the external sensors. Still, I checked the cameras, which now transmitted clear images of every corner of the house exterior to my cell phone. The ease with which I could check my security and disarm the alarm brought me a peace I hadn't felt in a long time. Knowing I had control over who came in and out, that I was protected by more than just a lock and a key, that changed everything. And as the night advanced and the silence stretched out, I realized that, although the feeling of vulnerability might never completely disappear, I had done everything in my power to protect my home. For the first time since the incident, I allowed myself to relax, lean back on the sofa, and close my eyes, confident that I was safe. That night, after the false alarm and having verified that everything was secure, I finally managed to surrender to sleep. But it was not a peaceful rest. My dreams were filled with shadows and elusive figures watching me from the corner of the room. I woke up several times, startled, running to check my phone, only to see the tranquil images from the security cameras. The next day, I made an important decision. I no longer wanted to live with constant fear, nor with the feeling that something could happen at any moment. I decided it was time to face the problem head-on. With the help of the police, I was able to obtain more information about the man who had invaded my house. He was someone known in the area for petty thefts and had already been seen lurking around other neighborhoods. The police continued their investigation and eventually arrested the man in another incident. Knowing that he was in custody brought a new level of relief. Over time, my sense of security began to restore. Of course, the occasional paranoia still visited me, but the cameras and alarms were constant reminders that I had taken measures to protect myself. I learned a lot from this experience. I learned about the fragility of the sense of security we have and how important it is to be proactive about our protection. I never again left keys hidden outside the house and always paid attention to my surroundings, especially in public places. The incident changed me in ways I never expected. It made me more vigilant, more aware of my environment, and, paradoxically, more grateful for the life I have. Each day that passes without incident is a small triumph, a silent celebration of normalcy and peace. I share this story not to spread fear, but to remind everyone of the importance of being aware and prepared. The reality is that we never know when something might happen, but being prepared can make all the difference. In the end, that night of terror transformed into a powerful reminder that, as long as we remain vigilant and armed with the right knowledge and tools, we can face whatever comes our way and move forward, perhaps a bit shaken, but unbreakable. Next story. When my parents divorced, my mom and I moved to my grandparents' house in a small, isolated village in Vermont. Our new home was an old, modest cottage next to my grandparents' main house. I thought it would be a temporary change, but I was about to enter an endless nightmare. The story continues in the next video. To see what happens next, continue the story by clicking on the card that is appearing or go to the previous video here on the channel. See you in the next video.